back. It's Taylor Ray of the 1P versus 2P podcast. With me, as always, is my brother and co-host, Ryan Ray. First couple things I want to start off the show with, some housekeeping items. So sorry that we've taken some time off between the last two episodes that we've put out. We've had some major life events. Ryan is now married. Congrats, Ryan.
Thank you so much. I really enjoy being on this side of the aisle.
I'm sure you're also enjoying having a career change as well. So major significant things going on in our lives, except for me. I have done nothing of importance while we've been off the air.
A life well wasted, as they say.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's get right into it. We're going to do this in a different way, at a different show format. Oh, the other housekeeping item I should say is that we have officially opened up a gaming merch store.
What are you selling?
On our website. So if you go to 1pvs2p.com, and you can either click on the sidebar, there's a link to our store on the sidebar with a 10% off coupon off anything that you see there, or just at the top, it says store right there. You'll see all our gear there. They're mostly t-shirts. There are a lot of items that are mugs and phone cases, some posters as well. And just to recap and describe just a few of them, one of my favorites, and by the way, I should say that I've designed them completely, and all the proceeds, everything that you buy in the store directly supports our show. Ryan and I both do this as a labor of love, as a side passion project. We both have full-time jobs, and so we got to pay some of the bills somehow when it comes to this podcast. And this is our best way, we think, of doing it, besides launching a Patreon, which we don't have just yet. Ryan, and I noticed that you've admired some of my designs so far. Tell me some of your favorites that are on the store already.
I really like the Diablo-inspired You Have Died t-shirt. That is a real standout one from the store. We have My Body Is Ready reference, all the hot gaming references.
Way to sell it. Way to sell it.
Available at our store. Give us the URL.
Yeah, the URL, I've simplified it for you. It's tinyurl.com/1pvs2p. Again, that's tinyurl.com/1pvs2p. Again, if you just go to our website, you'll also see it there all over the place. The store in the sidebar and at the top of the homepage. Automatically, if you click on any of the gear, you get 10% off your order. So take advantage of that. We also have some other popular shirts like GGEZ. There's a shirt that just says those letters. Good luck, have fun. GLHF. GGWP for good game, well played. There's one that just says ding, as in you're leveling up in WoW, but in kind of a neat font. There's also a salty emoji, and if you're familiar with the recent Heroes of the Storm 2.0 update, which we will talk about later in the show, you will instantly recognize what that looks like. So go ahead, check it out. Buy something, directly support us. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks again. Again, the URL is tinyurl.com/1pvs2p. All right, enough of the shameless plugging. Let's talk about games that we've been playing recently while we've been on a show hiatus. Start it off, Ryan.
Yeah, so I have been spending a lot of time playing these massive RPGs. Just feels like right now is a really great time to be into video games. Let's start off with a real bad game, though, first. A game I actually reviewed for the site, Mass Effect Andromeda. Ooh, boy. So for people who aren't familiar, this is the fourth Mass Effect game. Mass Effect is kind of a high space fantasy RPG from BioWare, the purveyors of such games as Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, Jade Empire, more recently Dragon Age, and of course the original Mass Effect trilogy, which were some of the most interesting games storytelling-wise of the last generation. And they're back with Mass Effect Andromeda. Well, I should say they're sort of back, because Mass Effect Andromeda is such like a backseat. It seems like BioWare is running a new crew of people who looked at the old Mass Effect games, didn't really take the hard lessons of like, let's really create a new universe, and instead, let's just throw in a bunch of old favorites and old tropes and things that kind of resemble new stuff, but really aren't all that new. You can get through the single player campaign of this game, if you streamline it in about 35 hours, but for story reasons, you may want to spend a little bit more time with it. And by the end of my playthrough, I got through about 80% of the content, and I spent about 75 hours, which is way too much time with that game. The game is bad. The characters are awful. A lot of the story moments feel very unearned. You play as a writer who's can be male or female. He's kind of the shepherd of this universe, and they're kind of like new pioneers in this Andromeda universe, and they get sent like 600 years in time and space to colonize new planets, and things don't go so well. There are people who have arrived ahead of you. You're way late. You kind of crash land on a planet with your father, and then for reasons I won't really get into unless we want to do a spoiler cast about it, you kind of take the role of the Pathfinder, kind of the leader of these new settlers. And the new characters aren't all that great. They're all kind of like riffs on past Mass Effect crew members. There are really only 2 new alien races, and the Angara is kind of interesting. They're kind of like a fishy type people who have lived in this universe and are just getting used to humans being in their side of the galaxy. A lot of this game revolves around the fact that you're basically trying to gentrify your corner of the universe and the conflicts within. And it's not BioWare's best work. It's really bad writing, really weak. They've done away with the Paragon Renegade system. Now you can choose between 4 different options. One that's like more casual, one that's professional, one where you can deal with situations that's also a little more serious. Or
this is with dialogue options you're talking about.
Right. The dialogue wheel has been expanded for 4 different kind of personality traits. And supposedly the more of a certain kind of answer you give to these choices kind of dictate the personality of your writer. And I just didn't really find that to be the case. The characters are just like, they respond kind of all the same. It's just like, and the voice acting is very monotone. There aren't a lot of redeeming factors about this game. And on top of it, it's buggy. There were characters that were just really like walk into cutscenes that they weren't meant to be. So it just kind of looks like everybody was doing T-pose and these supposed to be really dramatic set piece moments. And it was just not a good experience. The multiplayer is very standard Mass Effect 3. It's the exact same thing. Combat is a little bit more fluid. They've added jump jets. The cover system is a little bit more automatic, which makes fighting a little more dynamic, but also at the same time, it's hard to tell when you're really in cover, out of cover, when enemies can damage you. And it's just, this whole game is ill-conceived. And if this is what we are expecting to see from future Mass Effect games, I don't know that I really want to see more out of BioWare and EA on the Mass Effect front.
Yeah, you wrote in your summary for your written review on our site on Mass Effect Andromeda, it says that it's an intriguing premise betrayed by unnatural dialogue, stilted characters, too many menus, and by-the-numbers moments. But one of the things that kind of stood out to me when it comes to Mass Effect games is, you know, in the past, in the first 3, in the mainline trilogy, the quest log, there were so many different side quests. You could do companion missions that sort of built up your relationship and opened up new dialogue and unlocked new abilities sometimes with your other characters. There was a ton of side content that you could get yourself distracted with, but it always seemed manageable or interesting. You wanted to go after and explore new side stories. In this game, though, you wrote that it's sort of, the quest log really resembles like a massive computer file system. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Right. So there's so much side content in this game. It feels like every like B plot is basically the A plot. Everything you do, there's no telling like what side quests are actually important, which ones are going to be the interesting ones. Everything just seems like side content. This is like, I was telling you before we started recording that this is kind of like Dragon Age 2 level of like cookie cutter content. Every side quest always has the same like, I guess I did that. Does it really have an impact? I don't know. There are literally quests where you like go do the quest line and then the words flash on hold, so that the main storyline can progress until you can continue the next step of the quest. That's just like a really bad look. It's like, why am I playing this game if the game is going to tell me that this is not that important right this second? Like, it literally says on hold. I can't believe that in 2017, where we have games that have such interesting side characters, such interesting NPCs, like some of the other games we're going to be talking about in a little bit, that they just kind of like wrote this one off. Like, Mass Effect deserves so much better than the kind of content that they developed for this game. It's really something else.
You talk about here, you mentioned that they're separated by priority ops, allies, Helios assignments. or additional tasks, and it's really hard to figure out what's meaningful, what you should get to first. That sounds like a huge bummer to me. I played briefly the multiplayer only when I was over at your place a couple weeks ago. I didn't touch the single player stuff, but yeah, it's just more of the same, not much different besides new enemy types and the jetting around. But I do want to emphasize what you said before, which was that it's very difficult. I felt that it was very hard to tell whether or not I was behind cover. And that is really, really crucial to know when you're constantly fighting off waves and waves of enemies that are they're almost always using some sort of pincer maneuver. They're attacking at you on the left, on the right, behind you, always. So that's something that was very, very touchy for me. I did not really enjoy the controls in Andromeda's multiplayer, which was a bit of a bummer.
Right, and there's a lot of combat in that game, and that arguably is the best thing about Andromeda, and it's also kind of super weak, which really, really sucks. All right, let's move on to a game that has kind of more interesting combat that you've been playing. We've talked about it on the show before, but you've been playing Breath of the Wild, the Wii U version. I've completed the game since we last spoke on the Switch. I want to hear your impressions, though.
Well, I went into it. I have to admit that I am not the biggest Zelda fan in the world. I completely recognize that these games are classics. They're masterpieces. They are fun. They are personally not my favorite. I mean, I've played through basically every single one. I think the ones that I haven't touched have been some of the more recent handheld, like Triforce Heroes, A Link Between Worlds. But of course, I've played through the most important ones, right? Link to the Past, even the NES ones, Zelda 1 and 2, of course, Ocarina of Time. And Breath of the Wild is hands down the culmination of everything that has come before it. It is an incredible, incredible open world experience. And I know we talked about this at length with Alex, who was on our show on the PAX East episode. So I'm not going to rehash what you guys said there, but I was completely blown away by the environment, the scalability, the verticality of Link's movements. There are virtually no limits to what you can do physics-wise in that game, beyond, of course, breaking physics, right? There are hilarious ways that people have sort of gamed shrines, for example. There are these embedded puzzles that you typically see in these Zelda games, usually in dungeons. In this case, there are, I forget what the number is, but there are over 100 shrines to complete that grant you these orbs that you can turn in to increase your stamina and your hearts. But each one has a unique way of solving it, but there are many, many solutions in order to do so. So you have all these tools and weapons at your disposal to tackle them. And it's really fun seeing the different ways people are discovering methods. You know, I might solve it one way, and then I'll look at something online, like a GIF of someone solving it another way, and think, I never even thought of that. But that was a really creative way to use your Sheikah tablet abilities to freeze time, to freeze water, to use bombs. They're really, really fascinating ways that you can use tried and true Zelda tools in Breath of the Wild. Really, really, really spectacular experience. I've only played about, I would say 5 hours at this point, but absolutely loving every minute of it. There's so much to see.
Yeah, I would say that in my time away from the game since I completed it, it feels like we're getting the takes now from the internet of like, I really did like the shrines. They reminded me a lot of like the Portal 2 type puzzles. But at the same time, a lot of the shrines are straight up bad. Some of the like golfing shrines, I don't know if you've encountered any of those yet. There are some shrines where basically you have to kind of turn either the Switch tablet or the Wii U tablet in kind of like a physics-based way to get basically a ball into a hole. Those are straight up bad. It doesn't control very well. I find out that even though I like the combat in this game, the combat shrines are like the weakest shrines, and there are a lot of them dotted throughout the map.
Well, the reason is because the inventory system in this game is bad, I have to say, especially early on in the game when you have virtually no inventory slots. You can, of course, unlock more as you move along. That task, and in order to do that, is even difficult, right? Collecting those Korok seeds. That's a huge bummer. I don't like the weapon durability at all. You're constantly struggling. Like, I've been in battles where I literally ran out of weapons, and then I have to resort to using my Sheikah tablet magic powers, or using my bow, for example. That's super, super frustrating, and that to me deters it from being like the perfect game. Honestly, if they had resolved the durability and the inventory problems, even just the management of the inventory, moving through those menus, at least on the Wii U, is obnoxious. I don't know for you on the Switch, the sort of controller shortcuts that you can take. Those are also awkward to figure out. They're contextual, where if you have your bow out versus when you have your shield out, versus when you have a two-handed sword out. It's very difficult to wrap your brain around, and I don't like that portion. But literally everything else has been extremely thought out, well vetted. I think the developers definitely accounted for the creative ways that you can take on combat missions, to traverse this environment, which is gigantic. I saw a comparison between this and Skyrim, which I thought Skyrim was like, there's no way that anyone's going to explore this entire world in a somewhat decent time. And Breath of the Wild just absolutely dwarfs it. It's incredible what they've built. There are a few frame rate hitches here and there, mostly within towns. I think that's due to the limitations of the hardware itself. I think if this game were to run on a PC, for example, my goodness, it would be flawless performance-wise. But I don't take frame rate drops that much into account unless it's completely severe and unplayable. It's definitely something that you can look past. But I highly recommend Breath of the Wild, even for Wii U owners out there. That's what I'm playing it on. If you don't have a Switch, it's totally worth it. There's virtually no difference between the two.
I mean, the best open world games kind of let you not only have a kind of complete tool set and sandbox in which to explore the environments, but also kind of let the players tell their own stories. Most of Zelda games in the past have been very linear. It's always like, well, I have to get the hook shot so I can complete the hook shot dungeon. I have to get the fire arrows so I can, shoot the thing that's blocking me from proceeding in the ice dungeon. And this game is not really all that way. I mean, the first few hours are you trying to complete the basic 4 basic shrines to get your basic powers and the glider. And then after that, it's kind of like very open-ended. You can go straight to Ganon if you want. You can run around and help the other people. You can go unlock the divine beasts and all that. And for me, it's been really fun exploring that world. And when it comes to Game of the Year, it's going to be a very interesting conversation because there have been lots of other open world games that have come out since that were developed at the same time that just haven't come up to Breath of the Wild's really kind of like very, I wouldn't say limitless, but very open-ended style of adventure.
And it certainly has gotten the speedrunning community really, really enthusiastic about it. I think now the record is below 40 minutes, which is amazing if you look at this game. If you played it, you think to yourself, the only thing you need to complete Breath of the Wild straight through, which is incredibly hard to do, is to acquire the paraglider, and that's about it. And then it turns into more of a Dark Souls game where you're avoiding one-hit shots, avoiding death.
Right.
Very difficult. But the speedrunning community, it's amazing how they're bending and breaking that game. It's really incredible to see. All right, let's move on from Breath of the Wild. You've been playing Persona 5. I watched a little bit of that while I was over at your place.
Yeah, so I'm about 75 hours into Persona 5.
This is on PS4, by the way.
This is on PS4. It came out in Japan last year. Also in Japan, there's a PS3 version, but so I would say I'm about 55% of the way through that game's campaign. If you don't know, Persona 5 is a hardcore JRPG with some dating sim elements. There are basically you play as a team of high schoolers investigating why people are having these kind of psychotic breakdowns. You become a group called the Phantom Thieves, trying to steal their hearts so that they become less wicked and confess their sins or crimes or whatever the case may be. And this game is really, really stylish. I would even go so far as to say it's kind of like Persona 4 HD. A lot of the elements, a lot of the characters are very, very similar. I'm actually finding that I found that the Persona 4 characters were a little bit more relatable than these characters, but I'm still having a great time exploring the confidants systems. Basically, you hang out with people to kind of strengthen your own personas, the types of personas you have, so that you can fuse better personas. Personas are basically Pokemon in this universe. They are modeled after different gods and goddesses of different religions, creatures, monsters, and the combat is really simple and fun. The game's menus and art style are just way over the top. The soundtrack is fantastic. I'm finding myself listening to the OST without even playing the game. You can actually buy it on iTunes now. It's really an incredible package style-wise. And I would say that I'm finding myself enjoying the combat aspects of this game, as well as the more down moments too. It's really something else, and really a lot for your gaming dollar. The dungeons are really fun. The kind of like robbery thieving aspect of the game is really well represented. There's a surprising amount of traversal in the game, which I wasn't expecting. I mean, all it is you're pressing X to jump gaps, and some very light puzzle solving. But it's really, if you are into RPGs and you aren't interested in, haven't been interested in a Persona game before, man, Persona 5 is quite the introduction.
It's kind of a shame that it's not available on the Vita. That's how I played Persona 4, the Golden. I find it interesting that it was released both on PS4 and PS3. But let me ask you this, as Persona being known for being hardcore JRPGs, turn-based dungeon crawlers, right? How long do you think it takes for you to just mainline the game? Because this is a kind of game, in general, my impression of Persona 5, if it's anything like Persona 4, the Golden, is that the side content almost feels like mandatory work, because you have to not only go through a bunch of dialogue menus, but you're also trying to beef up your fellow party members by chatting with them, by going on little sort of side excursions. If you were to mainline this game, try to beat it as quickly as possible. Imagine if you were a speedrunner. How long would you expect it to take?
Well, you could try to skip a lot of the, talking to people and leveling them up and going into the kind of memento side dungeons and all that. I am trying to mainline this game as much as possible, because believe me, I do not want to be spending 200 hours in a game, but I'm really enjoying my time with it, and it's feeling like the hours are just flying by. I'd say if you're just trying to mainline the game and you go to sleep every night, you don't do all the side stuff, you could maybe get this done in like 80 hours minimum.
Wow. 80 hours. God.
So I said I'm about 75 hours in. It feels like I've just passed the halfway point. I feel like the back half of the game is going to be a little bit shorter, because there's a lot less like table setting and meeting the characters and all that. For the most part, I've met all the NPCs that I'm going to meet at this point, besides the like main villains. I would say I'm probably, by the end of this game, I'm probably going to be like 120 hours in.
Wow. That is truly a hardcore JRPG then.
And I would say the one thing that is kind of working it against it for me is that the localization isn't all that great. So some of the dialogue, you can mostly make out what they're saying, but it kind of reads like it's a Google translated, some of the dialogue reads like it's a Google translated version of literal Japanese into English.
Bad Babblefish.
It's weird. Like you can pierce together what it means in context, but it's like, who would structure a sentence this way? And also the story is told in a little bit of a flashback, because the main character is kind of being interrogated. And every time you meet a new NPC that unlocks a new confidant or a new type of persona that you can strengthen, it always rolls back to this scene where you're being interrogated, and she's always coming up with these like weird like ways, just like, so someone must have been giving you inside information because they were a fortune teller. And I was just like, what kind of police? And like, I don't watch a lot of Order SVU, but I don't see anybody there to be like, so tell me who your sources are. Tell me who runs the bodega on your street. Unless it's just like, it's just really crazy stuff.
Well, clearly you would be a bad cop, because I'm pretty sure that's exactly what they do. But they don't rely on fortune teller testimony. So we won't get into more spoilers on Persona. So I've been wasting a ton of time on Heroes of the Storm because the 2.0 massive patch just came out, and Blizzard has been hyping that for, I would say, the past month or so. It just dropped earlier this week, so if you haven't logged in a while, I highly recommend that you do. Because this game, Heroes of the Storm as a MOBA, has really turned into more of a free-to-play format than it already was, in the sense that, you know, if you've played Overwatch, you're familiar with Blizzard's loot boxes. And this applies to pretty much any free-to-play MOBA out there. You're unlocking cosmetic skins, sprays, whatnot. Imagine everything that you could unlock in Overwatch, and that's what you can now unlock in Heroes of the Storm 2.0, which was not the case before. So they've added things, like I said before, like skins. They've added some new ones here and there, but now you can, instead of just paying for them with in-game gold or spending real money, you can unlock them in earned loot boxes. And in order to earn loot boxes, you can either complete daily or weekly quests. And you can also, in addition, level up your heroes. So they've changed the experience progression. They've completely revamped it. So instead of you earning up a player level, which was very easy to reach the cap at level 40, that was just to say, I've played this game for X amount of hours and that's it. You're capped at 40. Now instead, your actual player level reflects your total hero level. So say, for instance, you have 5 heroes and they're all at level 1, you're going to be at player level 5, okay? If they were all at level 2, you would be at level 10, right? So as you level up your heroes, you're also unlocking loot chests at certain milestones, like level 5, for example. And then they've also added some new Overwatch tie-ins as well. So right now that's available is Genji. So Genji being the cybernetic ninja, really interesting assassin. And they just announced Diva, which I believe is going to be a new tank-style warrior in this game. Diva is one of my personal favorites, the sort of Korean esports character in a giant mech suit from Overwatch. A new map, Hanamura, the Japanese setting map from Overwatch again. And here's the kicker when it comes to coming back to this game. If you haven't played it in a while, I highly recommend that you do. It is probably the most approachable, easy to get into MOBA right now, because for a limited time, you can actually unlock 20 free heroes immediately. So I believe the mega bundles include, like, there's one for tanks, there's ones for assassins, there's one for like specialists and support, and I think that the fourth is like a grab bag. Instantly, these are heroes that you can unlock in perpetuity instead of just relying on the weekly free heroes.
I have one question for you, and then we can move on, because we've talked about Heroes of the Storm a lot on this show, because this is your MOBA K-hole, so to speak.
Yeah, it is definitely my guilty pleasure, for sure.
Besides the kind of progression and a lot of the kind of like free-to-play wrapper that they've changed, is there anything besides the new characters that they've changed and the new progression that they've changed gameplay-wise? Or is this otherwise basically still the same Heroes of the Storm gameplay, just with a few kind of new outside trappings and a few new characters?
Well, I think it encourages larger party sizes now. Gameplay-wise, it's identical, right? It's the same objectives. You're trying to attack the core. You're paying attention to your lanes, pushing lanes with your minions and creeps. You're playing your style of hero, whether it's a tank that's, it can take a lot of damage, or you're an assassin that's like a glass cannon. Your support is like a healer, and a specialist that sort of works on. They can do they can fill a bunch of different roles. So none of that has changed. The core gameplay hasn't changed, but what they've introduced now are Nexus challenges. So within the next, I want to say 4 to 5 weeks, what you can do is, if you're playing with a friend, if you're playing in quick match versus AI, or you're playing in Team League, which is a ranked mode, you can unlock stuff not only in Heroes of the Storm, so unique limited time only skins, but you also unlock them in Overwatch as well. So for example, in week 1, you can unlock like an Oni skin, which is like a demon form of Genji in Overwatch. You can also unlock that same skin in Heroes of the Storm. In week 2, I believe, or week 3, when Diva finally gets added into the game, you can unlock a really cool sort of police uniform that she will have in Overwatch. I know I'm getting into stupid cosmetic stuff, I know, but the point is that these weekly challenges require you to buddy up with at least one other party member, but it encourages you to play with up to 5, because you get XP bonuses that are multiplied if you have, like, for example, if you're playing with a party of 5, a full 5-person team, you get an XP bonus just for that without any friends.
I always knew Devo was going to be a cop.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, but seriously though, again, this is the best time to get back into it, not only because of the 20 free heroes, but because you're constantly unlocking stuff with these loot boxes. It's a really fun progression now. They've done some really, really great improvements in my opinion.
Well, we'll see if that pays any dividends for their player base, because from my perspective, MOBAs are already kind of very hard to get into. I understand that Heroes of the Storm is kind of the most approachable of the major ones out now, but man alive, have they not done a whole lot to keep my interest in that game, unless you're already part of the Blizzard fandom. So if this is the revamp that they're hoping to bring back people, or maybe make it a little bit more accessible, a little bit more like something with a slightly bigger player base like Overwatch, then that's something that I'm really all for.
Well, will new cute emojis convince you? Because they've added that in the loot boxes that you can unlock. There are also banners. Every time you attack an objective or a fort, a banner drops for the last hit. Or there are announcer voices. So, for example, you can replace the default with a character voice like the Butcher, which is hilarious, or Murky, reading off, major events that are happening in the game. Have I convinced you?
It sounds like Dota 2.
Yeah, it's exactly like Dota 2. But you know what? It's smart. It's very smart, and they've got a ton of people in there. I'm getting into matches a lot more quickly recently. I'm loving it. Of course, I'm really heavy into the rank stuff too, so I'm deep into this game. I'm definitely logging at least an hour daily, probably more than I should be.
All right, well, let's talk about a game that I've spent a little bit of time with, Nier Automata. So this game is Platinum developed. It's really an interesting game. There are 26 endings to this game. Some of them are a little bit gimmicky. I am about 5 hours in, and I would say that the first 5 hours, if you played the PS4 demo, you have to play through that first section without saving, which is kind of a bummer. The first section is really like an hour and a half. And your first impression of this game is it's a very Platinum style action game, very dodge focused, very standard combat, very much like Bayonetta, other Platinum games, like the Turtles game or the Transformers game. It plays like a really good version of those. But then the game kind of goes into some direction with as far as androids and the existence of humans and rebellion and so on and so forth. You can tell that this is a Platinum game, but at the same time, there's some very light RPG mechanics. There are some aspects of the game that kind of feel like an upgraded version of Einhander, very like shoot 'em up play styles, some really impressive boss battles.
Is it kind of like R-Type or Galaga? Or not Galaga, I'm sorry. R-Type.
A little bit less like that. It's basically like anime shoot 'em up sequences where you're like flying in a mech and dodging bullets, and
horizontally or vertically,
both. Kind of depends on the boss that you're fighting. So I haven't completed ending A yet. There are 5 basically core endings to that game, and then the rest are kind of a little bit more off the deep end, but I'm really enjoying my time with this game. I highly recommend you check it out. It probably is going to be on a lot of Game of the Year lists, if I had to say, reading on about what apparently happens in this game. It looks and sounds incredible. I'm super excited to continue on this path. Platinum is one of those developers that does really, really interesting things. My first game with them was Vanquish. Really, really cool take on the Japanese Gears of War style game that was made in that kind of era. They've always really done really fascinating things. Bayonetta, of course, really fast-paced, over-the-top action game that I really, really love. Bayonetta 2, of course, super awesome as well. Just awesome action games that really, we're not used to seeing character action games so much since the Devil May Cry days, since Capcom kind of took a stab at it. And now we're seeing the original, them taking riffs on game franchises we didn't really expect to see sequels to. The original Nier was kind of a game like this, but more of a cult classic, and nobody really played it. And it was really obscure. And this one seems to be getting a lot more traction. So I look forward to checking and spending more time with Nier Automata.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about it being a Platinum Games style of gameplay? I mean, you've talked about the shoot 'em up portion. what is it about like the usual combat? It's like a 3D action game, right? Is it more of like a hack and slash?
It's a little bit of a hack and slash.
Is it similar to Bayonetta?
It's very similar to Bayonetta. The timing windows aren't as tight as some of the Bayonetta windows are. It's very loose. In fact, there is a difficulty in this in this game where you basically don't have to touch anything at all, and it kind of auto dodges for you. So in that respect, it's both a little bit easier. They aren't really focusing so much on the precise timing element of a lot of these styles of games. Like Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance was another game that they made, and that was very much like a defensive style, like run around and slash robots, but at the same time, like dodge specific attack patterns. And Nier Automata is a little bit less focused on that aspect of it. I'm finding that the story is actually the part that's more interesting.
Yeah, that game seems to be getting some very, very positive reviews coming out of nowhere. I think they've hit some sales records with Nier that they weren't expecting here in North America, because in Japan it's extremely popular even before. So that's quite exciting for this new game. I mean, just a ton of games that have come out this year that are worthwhile, especially from Japan. It's really, really interesting. These games that are being developed and becoming so popular so far in 2017. Speaking of another Japanese game, right? Yeah, no, it was
Japanese.
developed over there. Yep. So Resident Evil 7 Biohazard for PS4, although I am playing it on PSVR, and I'm only 1 hour deep in this game, but oh my God, the atmosphere and the jump scares, the horror, and it's incredible. It's amazing. It's really, so far, I think the killer app for PSVR. I have tried of other PSVR games like Res Infinite, Until Dawn, Rush of Blood, which is like a shooting gallery and a roller coaster put together, and PlayStation VR Worlds, which is just a bunch of mini games. This game is amazing, 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 and really takes you out of your sense of the real world and drops you into a super, super creepy haunted mansion that looks kind of like it's in the bayou of like New Orleans in a swamp. The moment when you're walking from outside in the sunshine, in the swamp, and then you step your first foot into the house where no lights are on, I literally got tingles down my spine. It just has that amazing sensation, because not only is PSVR, you're blocked from your senses are blocked from the real world, right? It's just amazing how this game sort of transports you. It's an incredible style that I'm really digging so far.
So I have a question about the VR aspect of this game. Do you think if you were playing, because a lot of people aren't going to be buying PSVR, there's a PC version of this game out that doesn't have VR support quite yet. Do you think that it detracts a little bit from the experience if you aren't wearing a VR headset?
I don't think so, because it is first person. Even if you're playing with a controller and not in PSVR, I think the only thing it would take away from this game is that sort of sense of dread. I don't think the jump scares would be as dramatic for you, obviously, because, when you're playing with a controller, there's that sense of separation. But in PSVR, you hear every little creak in the floor. You hear the zombies that are sort of rustling and off in the distance. In VR, it's just it's so in your face. It's so visceral. It's totally, it focuses your attention on your surroundings. The disadvantage of being in PSVR I've noticed so far is that every turn you make, and I understand why they made this choice, your movement is slower on purpose, and you're using your left stick to physically walk around, but your right stick, of course, just like in a typical game, is used to look around, right? Left stick being to walk, right stick being to look. But because you're in VR and they want to prevent that nausea or the VR sickness, you're only, every time you hit the right stick, you're only turning about, I would say, maybe less than a quarter of a turn, right? You're not turning 90 degrees, you're turning somewhere less than 45 degrees. And so it's a little stuttery, if I had to describe it, not in terms of frame rate, but you almost like stutter when you turn. And that's to prevent that connect in your brain to say like, whoa, my physical body that I'm sitting down or standing up in is not physically moving in this space. It's to prevent that nausea on purpose. I know why they did it. It's just a little awkward. And if you were playing not in VR, that's not there. It's smooth movement like you would expect in any normal, usual first-person game. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. From from what you're saying, it seems like when you're playing a game in on a TV screen, there's that kind of sense of separation. There's this feeling that's just like, okay, I'm role playing as this character playing in first person.
Exactly.
And when you're in the headset, with this game, it seems like every corner is dangerous. Every time you open a door, you're just kind of like creaking to peek in. A lot of the best horror games can have that effect on you. Maybe like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, or its sequel, or Soma. A lot of these games deal more in the kind of like psychological aspect of like, oh, there's this thing that's coming after me, this monster, this creature, this serial killer, whatever it may be. And they kind of deal in the more like you should be afraid of that thing, instead of feeling like this empowering action thing that a lot of previous Resident Evils have gone after, like, the Resident Evil 5 style of like, okay, I'm this like badass character and I'm going to take down this zombie virus thing that's coming after me. And it feels like immersing yourself in the VR headset. It kind of makes it empowers you to make you feel like the character, but at the same time, it makes you feel powerless because you're living and breathing the experience the same way they might.
Exactly. And another thing to add to that is that the combat is purposely bad when it comes to melee. I've only played 1 hour's worth, but there's not to spoil the story moment, but of course a zombie attacks you, right? This is a Resident Evil game. Okay. So, of course there's a jump scare. It attacks you and you're fending it off with your fists and blocking with your arms, and, you're getting damaged, but you almost feel a little helpless, right? Like as if you were fending off a zombie in real life, if that were to exist. And I haven't yet gotten, I've used a bat before and that felt slightly empowering, but only limitedly. I have not gotten a gun yet, but even still, from what I've read of the reviews, what I'm expecting is that beyond the first couple of hours in the game, it turns less of a horror movie style where it's constantly jump scaring you and creating that deliberate sense of dread. And it's more about the survival aspect. It turns from a horror into a survival game where you have limited resources, you're hiding on purpose, you have limited ammo constantly, you're not exactly sure where to go to next, but there are always zombies threatening you from every corner. That's what I'm expecting soon. But regardless, the PSVR experience is incredible for this game. So glad that I've played this game this way so far.
So I have one last question for you, and then we can move on. Have you experienced any boss battles in this game yet?
Not yet.
So that aspect of the Resident Evil games for me has kind of always fallen flat. The boss battles tend to be very gimmicky. The end of Resident Evil, I believe it's 5, you basically shoot 2 rockets into Wesker in a volcano.
That is 5, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and it's
super
just
over
like,
the top. Yeah.
It's over the top, and it kind of like detracts from it a little bit for me.
Well, Ryan, I mean, Resident Evil 5 is a weird game. I mean, it's so different than its predecessors. Like 4, for instance, is so good at like creating that survival part of that game. There's very much a focus on the survival part and less about like Resident Evil 5 felt very much like Gears of War. It was a cover shooter, right, and you were never running out of ammo. You had constant explosives. It was an action game. It was not a survival horror game in the least bit.
But I would even say like Resident Evil 4 for like the like masterpiece of this particular franchise, it had some very weak boss battles. Come on, you're fighting the fish in the boat, and every time it like tips you over in the boat, you have to swim back. Like that, I'm sorry, that's kind of lame. I'm just wondering if Resident Evil 7. I've read that there are some boss battles in this game, and particularly the last section of the game that where you're not there yet, but apparently there are a surprise. You fight a boss in a Resident Evil game, but some of that kind of right, like outwears its welcome. And that part to me would be kind of like, that would be kind of a huge bummer if a Resident Evil game didn't go all the way with the like existential dread the first few hours really introduce.
No, I mean, it seems like it's going all the way in that direction completely. And the story, this doesn't spoil anything because this literally happens in the first minute, is In the opening cinematic, you see your wife who's been missing for a very long time. It's this video message, and you see this last recording of her, and then you investigate her last known location at this mansion in the bayou. Suffice to say, you find her almost immediately, but then things turn very, very, very dark immediately afterwards. I'm not going to spoil anything more, but that personal connection that you get immediately sets the stage for a really, really disturbing story where you start finding photos of who actually lived there in this mansion that's supposedly abandoned. What are some of the rooms that you encounter, and what's physically in there is absolutely morose and disgusting. And sometimes it's gory. Like it is embodying that very, very dreadful atmosphere that I really, really appreciate with intense horror games. Like, for example, The Evil Within. Evil Within did a great job with this. I'm getting those vibes immediately.
Interesting. Well, I will probably pick this game up at some point when it's on Steam sale. I'm interested in the PC version, and I look forward to hearing more of your impressions maybe a little bit later.
So, any other thoughts on that, or shall we wrap this thing up?
Yeah, let's wrap it up. We talked about a lot of games. We hope to get back on a more regular schedule, talking about the news and stuff that's happening in the video game industry. This is increasingly a really, really cool time to be playing video games. A lot of great stuff out there. A lot of stuff that, no matter what style of game you really enjoy, a lot of just like great video games to be playing right now. It's an amazing time to be interested in this medium.
Well said. All right, let's wrap it up. That's it. If you liked our show, please subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes and Stitcher, and tell a friend. Tell a friend to subscribe and listen to our show. Let us know what you think about our show by submitting a review, especially on iTunes. That would be a huge help.
You can also listen to us on a bunch of other services, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Clamor, or our website, which is 1pvs2p.com, or search for us using your favorite podcast app. That's how I listen to our show. We don't really have sources for this week's stories or show notes, but we will include a list of some of the games that we did talk about on this week's episode.
Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at 1pvs2p_podcast, and also don't forget to check us out on YouTube and Twitch. As always, we want to thank Phonetic Hero for the use of his songs for our show's themes. Coffee Stomp and Super Manly Brothers X, both of them are part of the compilation project Chiptunes Equals Win. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Ryan, as always, and we'll see you next week.
What are you buying?